everyone, it's B. Today I am going to be talking about the Goths versus Preps war of the early 2000s. It may seem silly to us now, but back in the day, the tension between Goths, or generally alternative people, and Preps was at an all-time high. This led to years of TV and movie tropes based off of this conflict, some pretty embarrassing DeviantArt drawings clearly made by 12-year-olds, and one particular trope that has become increasingly popular in recent years, the odd couple trope. So, what do I actually mean by goth versus prep? We're gonna take a look at some super old Urban Dictionary descriptions to help us understand what the goths and preps were to the average person and generally what people thought of these groups. So, let's start with the preps. As Danielle wrote in 2004, a prep is a person that is totally brainwashed by the media. They wear what brands the media tells them to, such as Abercrombie & Fitch, American Eagle, Arrow, Hollister, Express, etc. They basically only listen to mainstream music. They make fun of people who aren't afraid to be themselves, otherwise known as individuals. Preps are shallow. They are monkeys. Monkey see, monkey do. The media says something's cool. Prep sees. Prep thinks it's cool. Okay. Basically, these are the popular kids. They fit in, they aren't outcast in any way, they wear what's popular, they listen to the music that's popular, they have lots of friends, and that's about it. In the saying, I'm not like other girls, preps are the other girls. And you can definitely tell that this specific description was written by someone who wasn't like the other girls. I can feel the rage radiating off of my screen. On the flip side of that are the goths, the complete opposite of preps. As Nymphetamine wrote in 2006, real goths, in all caps, are victims of social assumptions, do not worship Satan, are not depressed, are quite happy, can have friends, don't always listen to gothic music, dress how they want to dress, not always in black, don't sit around complaining about not having friends. They don't want friends. A real goth is happy being a social misfit, and often don't want to be referred to as goth. This person also then goes on a rant within the same description about emo kids, which are generally considered to be entirely separate from goth, and the groups were not friendly with each other, even though when it came to the goths versus preps war, anyone with an alternative style or anyone who just wore black a little bit too much one day would be tossed in with the goth group anyways. So that also included emo and scene kids, so I don't know why they had such a big beef going on in the 2000s, because you're all in this together. Get over it, you know? Anyways, they go on to say poser goths, sometimes known as emo, will call themselves goth. They don't use a capital letter to start the word. Pretend to worship Satan, although it's rare that they actually believe in him. Will act depressed all the time no matter what he/she is really feeling. Will dress in clothes purely from Hot Topic, Planet 14, Stars and Stripes, and places like that. One band wonders, think they're so goth because they listen to a band that is sometimes labeled as gothic, such as Slipknot, whereas in actual fact, Slipknot are new/death metal, dress only in black, and are pure attention seekers. Okay. But wait, there's more. They weren't done. They even go on to make up a little conversation between a poser goth and an actual goth to go along with it. So it says, poser goth, you're such a poser. You think you're so goth, but you don't even listen to Slipknot. Goth, okay, like I would care what you think. Poser goth, you make me sick. You're not even wearing black and you call yourself a goth. Goth, I never called myself a goth. That was a label invented by people like you. Real people don't need labels. Mic drop. Why did they write this? I think they were just having a bad day and they got into an argument with someone and came home and wrote this on Urban Dictionary, and now it's just sitting out there in the void forever. I hope they're doing better now. It's been almost 20 years, so I would think so. Back in the day, there was a lot of contention about what goth exactly was and who was worthy enough to be able to call themselves that. I talked in my video about the virtual worlds of the early to mid 2000s about some of my own experiences as a baby goth when I was a kid, trying and failing to get involved in the community through virtual worlds like Swinky or WeMe, because I wasn't goth enough and would often get called a prep just based on what my in-game avatar looked like. So if you would go into a more goth chat room, they would call you a prep and basically kick you out. But if you took the same character and went into a preppier chat room, they would call you goth and then kick you out. It was really stupid now that I think about it. What was the point of that? Basically, to a goth, the existence of preps went against everything they stood for and vice versa, and that's where the conflict started. While trying to find some good examples for this video, I came across this outrageously old blog called angelfire.com, and you can clearly see that graphic design was this person's passion, and they basically cataloged the whole Goths versus preps conflict as it was happening in the early 2000s. So, the introduction to this website says, preps and goths are classic enemies. The preps attempt to bully the goths for looking funny, and the goths write angsty live journal entries about the preps in return. It's an endless cycle. I see the heated rivalry at my school all the time. The blog goes on to compare preps and goths on different factors like fashion, looks, click power, problems, dating life, intellect, personality, friendliness, and hobbies. Which is a lot. There's a pretty comprehensive list. My apologies in advance for the amount of times that this person uses the word slutty in the next couple things I read. It's the early 2000s, people just talked like that, so. In describing differences in fashion, they write, preps, American Eagle or other overpriced brand name for both guys and girls. Girls prefer tight faded jeans and slutty tank tops or baby tees. Guys prefer baggy faded jeans and fake vintage tees or polo shirts. Goths, all black, sometimes with a band shirt of a band they hope you've never heard of, black jeans, black hoodies, or overpriced army surplus, slutty fishnets for the girls, don't forget the $40 studded belt. Next up, they compare looks. Preps. Everyone is supposed to think that the preps of the opposite gender are hot. The girls sport fake tans with their hair often dyed platinum blonde and about 20 tons of makeup, including but not limited to baby blue eyeshadow, a bottle's worth of nail polish, and lipstick with so much glitter it causes seizures when they nod. Then they say something else that's super not cool in the modern times, but, you know, it's the early 2000s, but I'm not gonna say it because it's not cool. Guys always frost the end of their hair blonde and either spike it into a ski jump or buzz it back as far as it will go. Guys obsess over being muscular, are constantly bragging about their six-packs, and usually have square jaws. Goths, pale as fuck. If they aren't naturally, they wear creepy white face powder. They also apply about 20 tons of makeup, particularly black eyeshadow and lipstick. This applies to both guys and girls. The older ones have piercings in odd places, but the younger ones are too wussy. Some wear emo glasses to capture a sort of crossover look, and let's not forget the dyed black hair that's either spiked or really long. I also have to cut out the last line of this one. What were we doing in the early 2000s? Don't say stuff like that. Not to sound like super old or anything, I know that Y2K stuff is really popular with younger people now, and sometimes, like, looking back on the way people used to talk back then, there is no way, like 90% of the shit people said would fly now, and that's probably for the best, because just reading this, I'm like every 2 sentences. The early 2000s were not nearly as inclusive as things are now, and that's all I'm gonna say about that, because woo! I think this one part of the blog really sums it all up. This is the personality portion. Preps, airheaded, slutty, bitchy, and better than you. Goths, pretentious, depressing, angsty, and better than you. Whoever wrote this seems to have not belonged to either group, so I think it gives us a pretty good idea of what the general consensus was about these two groups at the time that the Goths versus Preps war was being waged. During this time period, there was a huge boom in what was likely goth middle schoolers trying to artistically express their hatred for preps. Some of the DeviantArt posts I found while trying to find some examples for this video were absolutely killing me. And that's not to throw shade at like literal middle schoolers. I was a scene kid in middle school, and I absolutely drew cringy shit like this in my notebooks all the time. I'm not gonna lie to you guys to make myself sound cooler. I was definitely contributing to the Goths versus Preps war when I was growing up because I was always bouncing from like alternative style to alternative style during my very awkward tween years of writing angsty nonsense in my diary about how all the girls with Ugg boots and Aeropostale shirts think they're so much better than everyone else, and I bet they probably listen to Justin Bieber or whatever too. Ew. I would never do that because I listen to real music, like Bullet for My Valentine. I think the big theme of most of these drawings is showing the difference between interests, specifically the music that they listen to and what they wear. And I honestly don't think I've ever seen one of these drawings with boys in it instead of girls, and I looked through a lot of pictures when researching for this video. Just based on the fact that I used to be a middle school girl once upon a time during the years when the Goths versus Preps war was still going on, what you wore definitely made a big difference in how people, usually other girls, treated you. So I get why so many kids who went through the same thing were upset enough to draw how they felt and upload it online, because when you're like 12 years old, stuff like that feels like the end of the world. So as funny and cringy as these drawings are to look at as an adult, I get it, because kids are fucking mean. As the Goths versus Preps war waged on, the concept began popping up in places you probably wouldn't have expected. It was mentioned in popular movies, like with the super iconic cafeteria clique scene from Mean Girls in 2004, and obviously the rivalry between Janice Ian and Regina George. And in the video I made talking about Zwinky, I briefly mentioned that it had a sister site called Zwinky Cuties, which was targeted towards tweens rather than teens and young adults. And what was on that website, you ask? A literal game called Zwinky Cuties Preps vs. Goths. It's mentioned in a game for kids that are like 12 years old. That's how relevant it was. Zwinky, the normal site, not the cutie site, was the first place that I was ever introduced to the Goths versus Preps war through interactions I had with other players, so to think that the site was also aware of this to such an extent that they made a game about it, targeted towards the people that it was like affecting the most, is just super funny to me. This wasn't even the only website that caught on to the trend though. GirlsGoGames.com, the online home base of every single preteen girl in the early to mid-2000s, cashed in on the conflict as well with their Devilish series of games. This beloved series of games focused on two characters, a goth devil girl and a preppy angel girl. I loved this series of games as a kid, particularly Devilish Dress Up, because I love dress-up games. Basically, the point of the games was to have one character do things behind the other's back without getting caught. The preppy angel girl does nice things, and the goth devil girl does not so nice things. There was devilish stylist, hairdresser, valentine, cat, dress-up, pet salon, etc., all of which are unfortunately no longer playable thanks to the discontinuation of Adobe Flash Player, which I am still very salty about. I think the intention of these games was to be like, oh, these girls don't like each other because they have totally opposite fashion styles, but that's where the odd couple trope I was talking about in the beginning of the video comes in. As we all know, once the internet becomes aware of something, it takes on a life of its own, and believe it or not, the Girls Go Games devilish characters have a pretty thriving fandom. On Tumblr, at least. If I'm talking about fandoms, I'm always talking about Tumblr, just for future reference. Basically, Tumblr has collectively decided that Goth Devil Girl and the Preppy Angel Girl are dating. And I mean, totally get it. Fully support this decision. I would be lying if I said I didn't totally ship it when I was a kid. And the fan art of these two girls is just adorable. I'm also happy to report that if you look up Goths versus Preps on Google Images looking for some angsty middle school or DeviantArt drawings, there are lots of newer drawings where the prep and goth girls are girlfriends rather than enemies. So it definitely seems like the idea that goths and preps must intrinsically be enemies is like a thing of the past. But you thought I was done. I'm not done, because it's just been rebranded. So, Goths versus Preps is a thing of the past because nobody really calls themselves that anymore. There are still Goths. I'm not saying that they're not still Goths. I know that they exist. But the Goths versus Preps thing doesn't exist because it's just rebranded as something else every couple years. So, the most recent example I can think of off the top of my head right now is like 2019 when there was like the Visco girl versus E-girl conflict on TikTok. Do you remember that? It's just the same shit. It's just the same shit with a different label just like 10 years later. It just repeats itself, just in different forms, and it always comes back to the I'm not like other girls thing. That's just the way it is. This combo of a goth and a prep being turned into a romantic couple or best friends instead of enemies has been increasingly popular in the past few years, with the greatest example of this being probably Marceline and Princess Bubblegum from Adventure Time, who have followed the enemies to lovers and odd couple tropes as the show progressed, with their romantic relationship being confirmed in the series finale in 2018 after years of hinting to it. In the Adventure Time special Obsidian, we finally get to see Princess Bubblegum and Marceline enjoying a bit of domestic bliss and embracing their differences, and it's pretty great. I would be lying if I said I didn't totally cry while watching this. It's just really nice to see that the media isn't still reinforcing this super dated idea that people who have different interests or styles have to automatically be enemies and aren't perpetuating the whole "I'm not like other girls" idea as much as they used to when I was growing up. I mean, one of the most popular duos right now is Sanrio's Kuromi and My Melody, and the juxtaposition, I'm so sorry, I hate the word juxtaposition, between pastel aesthetics and goth aesthetics has been super popular in the past few years as well because the contrast is really great. This exact contrast is actually what led to the creation of styles like pastel goth that used to be super popular back in 2013. I'm sure that the person who wrote that super dramatic Urban Dictionary rant about poser goths was absolutely pissed when pastel goth came onto the scene. There was also that trend a couple years ago where everything was about having a goth GF, which, progress I guess, but we all know most people posting about wanting a goth GF did not mean someone who was literally goth. They were mostly talking about e-girls who wear a black and white striped long sleeve under everything with a wallet chain and fishnets. I'm making fun of myself. Don't worry about it, okay? But the fact that there was ever even a trend where all kinds of people were posting about not only accepting goth people but wanting to date them is a huge contrast from the drama of the early 2000s. All the "I'm not like other girls" and Goths versus Preps war nonsense ever did was make it harder for people to accept and get along with one another based on very superficial and surface level characteristics. Honestly, it doesn't matter literally at all what you wear, what kind of music you listen to, what stores you shop at, whether you wear all black or all pink. None of that reflects who you are as a person. What matters is just not being a shitty person and not judging each other based on things that literally don't matter. It's not that hard, and we just made it way too complicated for no reason at all. Basically, what I'm saying is that both goths and preps had an equal capacity to be shitty, especially when it came to the goths versus preps war, because at the end of the day, they're both judging each other based on what music they listen to, how they do their hair, their makeup, what they wear, and then being angry when someone else does that to them, even though they're doing that to the other person. It's a two-way street. They were both equally in the wrong for perpetuating this silly conflict for as long as it went on, but it's not all bad, because as a result, we got things like greater representation in the media of different types of people and relationships, and we've slowly eroded away the idea that the best thing a girl can be is not like other girls, which, thank God. I think taking a look back at what was considered important in the early 2000s and how that affected the kinds of things we see in the media now is really interesting, and I have been just dying to talk about the Goths versus Preps war. I've had this idea for this video written in the notes app of my phone for months, so I'm really happy that I finally got around to talking about it, because I just remember it being such a big part of the culture of growing up in the early 2000s, and especially of early internet culture, so that fits right in with the things I talk about on my channel, so I'm glad that I finally got around to making this video. Alrighty, I have lots and lots of fun videos planned for the future, as well as a few more Women of Survival horror videos coming up, and I've just been having such a great time making these videos the past few months, and I hope you guys have been enjoying them as well. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a good day or night, or whatever time it is wherever you are, and I will see you all next time.